You're listening to Airey Bros Radio. Be there or be square, because it's all killer, no filler.
I don't think I'm in a battle to transcend my ego anymore, or certainly to get rid of it. And I think that's a fool's errand anyway. I've been on this whole journey for the last 5, 10, 15 minutes, usually involving a lot of suffering, and then just go back to the breath, and within one breath, you're back into Satori. As Ram Dass would say, there's that seat of the soul. There's that sense of awareness, so you don't lose that. It's a difference between being lost in it versus you see that you're playing a role in a movie versus you're just lost in the movie. Keeping that sense of awareness is the golden egg. And I was just thinking about the Titanic sinking, and if it's true that musicians played music on it, that's just really beautiful. And sometimes I feel like that when I'm playing gigs and stuff, like I'm playing music on the deck of the Titanic. This is East Forest, and you're listening to Airey Brothers Radio.
Your latest album, Music from the Deck of the Titanic, is out now, and you've done albums with Ram Dass. You've done albums where you synthesize for people to, do mushroom trips to. What is the concept or the message behind this album?
Well, it's a studio album. I do studio albums, and I also have these albums I guess I call ceremony albums, where they're recorded in mushroom ceremonies. And the studio records, what's different and fun about them, I suppose, is you can do whatever you want and work on it over time and have other people play on them. And so it was just over the last couple years, as we all know, has been a really wild time. And I was exploring a lot of feelings of just things falling apart, and sometimes feeling good about it and bad about it and all the different emotions. And I was just thinking about the Titanic sinking, and if it's true that musicians played music on it, that's just really beautiful. And sometimes I feel like that when I'm playing gigs and stuff, like I'm playing music on the deck of the Titanic. So I was just playing around with that idea, and all the songs are swimming around those concepts.
Is the song So What, would you say that's the first single you released from the album?
It wasn't the first single, no.
All
I think
right.
it was the third, but we put out a few different singles. That one's a little different because it's got Duncan Trussell, comedian, and it's the first time I've used spoken word a lot in some of my other work, but I'd never worked with a comedian.
So when you did that song, it was from a podcast. Did you know when you were doing that podcast that you wanted to do a song?
We did, yeah. I reached out to Duncan and asked him, I said, would you be down to record a conversation? We can have it be a podcast, and then I'll sample it. But other than that, I wasn't really sure what we'd have, or if it'd be a couple sentences. But Duncan talks a lot, and he's funny, and it just that's how the cookie crumbled, and it ended up being a longer rant. But it actually, if you give the whole 9 minutes to listen to it, it comes full circle, and it's pretty cool.
That's a beautiful song, and I've heard you speak about it. And Duncan makes the point where if the alien comes, so what? What's really going to change, right? Someone's still going to piss on the toilet. You're still going to get mad. And then at the end of the song, he talks about how his mother, who's deceased, is kind of in all the love in his life now. How did you kind of bring that together? And when you presented that to Duncan, what did he think about the final song?
Well, it took Duncan a long time to listen to it. I mean, he didn't listen to it until it was released, which was a bit nerve-wracking because I wanted him to give me the thumbs up or not well before that process, but he just never listened to it. So he hit me up after it was out. So I remember when the phone rang and I saw he was calling, I was like, wow, I hope this is good because there's not much I can do about it now. And he was into it. But he doesn't like listening to himself, which sounds a little ironic given that his job essentially is talking, and he's a comedian and a podcaster, but he doesn't want to kind of have that critical mind listening to his own voice. So he was happily surprised. I think he was hearing about it from other people that he knows, oh, I heard that track. It's really great. It's really funny. And then he finally is like, all right, I got to buckle down and listen to this thing. He liked it. So
I bet he was probably getting blown up on social media and stuff with people hitting him up about the song before he even probably listened to it. Curious, with that particular song, was that something that it started just from that conversation with you, and then you built the music around everything from that riff, I guess?
Well, I had the music in a shape already, but I didn't know it was going to be four. I had a bunch of songs with the drummer Jens Karas and the bass player Owen Hoffman Smith and me on piano. So the song's really just like kind of a rhythm section jamming in a way. And I was working on that as a song, and it was a bit of an orphan. And it wasn't really going to be on the album because I didn't know what to do with it. And then when I had the Duncan stuff, I was just experimenting with music, and I dropped it into that one, and it worked really well. I just had to extend the song like by several minutes to make it work. So I shaped it as far as the rhythm of the song itself, from the verses and the chorus and the breaks and all that, to make it fit with his words. But it really was one of those things that just worked. Like when I just tried it initially, it just worked. So then it was really just massaging it a little bit to make it fit.
Okay. I want to hear about your sort of creative process with all of this stuff, but I'm curious, and I apologize if it's out there in the ether, but how did you get your connection to music, and how did that journey kind of start with you as a kid? Because we've had some interesting artists on that have said that they're, whether it's their parents playing cool music for them when they're growing up, or even some of them being artists themselves and encouraging that kind of thing. Jimmy and I always find that fascinating because we're athletes, and that was kind of the direction that we were steered in, for better or worse. So I'm curious, what was that journey for you?
I was introduced to music in school, in public school, and I loved it. So there was just a lot of opportunity in elementary school and all the way through high school to do anything from like playing in the band or choir or musical theater, anything with music. I just enjoyed doing it. I thought it was fun. And so I got a lot of experience essentially doing music in groups, I didn't have a lot of experience doing music on my own, and I didn't do that really until right when I got to college. And that's when I started playing piano more then, and just getting into writing songs. And then right when like the digital revolution happened and you could record music on a computer, and that became more of a mainstream thing with the iMac and stuff. That's really when I started coming up, because my type of music wouldn't exist probably if I didn't have the ability to experiment and make music really inexpensively for a long time, to develop a sound that was just nothing that would ever go through a studio system, or it wasn't going to be a label that was going to be like, yeah, well, I also needed a long time to develop myself. So I just taught myself, and I'm still teaching myself, but it's been 20 years of doing music and hustling, and I really enjoy mixing and engineering. It's really challenging, but it's also a really fun part of the process, but a very different mindset than performing or even just being a recording artist.
And when you say you're writing music, because I was blown away by another artist that we had on that said that he doesn't, still to this day, doesn't read music. So I'm curious, when you play and stuff, are you capable of reading music? Is that part of your process?
I can read music. It's not a lot of part of my process. I mean, I learned a lot of the basics of music stuff in school. So, I can't sight read very well at the piano at all. Actually, I'm terrible now, but I can look at music. Like, I speak that language, and if I need to talk to musicians, for the most part, I know most of it. But some of those super jazz heavy stuff starts to get a little over my head. But it doesn't matter as much. I mean, the way I play music is largely by ear and just intuition and just what I'm vibing on. I don't really take a theoretical approach to it, I try not to.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me that so many high-level artists don't necessarily go down that rabbit hole when they're creating and performing and stuff.
I mean, it's just whatever works for you. But if you think about it, that's just a language that's translating something happening. So it's in some ways not relevant unless you're trying to use it to explain to other people how to do something. So you can either do that. Some musicians, you can just explain it or sing it or jam. And some people, like when I'm working with string players, often I have to transcribe it out and write it down. And that is somewhat frustrating because it feels limiting. I really believe in the power of improvisation and what wants to just ideas that you're getting in the moment. That's where all the good stuff is. And sometimes when you just write it down, it can be limiting to that. But for better or worse, when you have anytime you have like more than one player, like 2 string players, 3, 4, you have to write something down.
So you said you like to improv, and I heard you state on another interview that when you're doing music for ceremony, you're working with whatever mushrooms and you're working with the substance to kind of help synthesize that. Have you ever came up with something and then forgot it, or because you were under the influence that kind of just went into the ether and you never got it back?
Sure. Yeah. All the time. I mean, even the stuff that I record, it's like if I can't remember how that song works. Like I have to sit down and I figure it out. Okay, what chords are those? What exactly was I doing? And even sometimes, like let's say I played a song in a ceremony, improvised it. Later on, I want to play it in a concert or something like it. So I have to learn the song. And I'll even figure out the chords and the instruments and all that kind of stuff, the rhythm. And I'll play it. And it's the same song, but it just doesn't have the same juju or it just doesn't work. And it's this interesting, like the way those things go together is not as simple as like a recipe. There is a kind of feeling too that sometimes can be difficult to recreate.
Are you at a point now where you're recording all your ceremonies?
Most of them, yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't work or there's a malfunction or whatever, or you can't, but for the most part, I tend to record everything.
So you perform and write some really powerful music, right? And you're forever going to be connected to Ram Dass, and we're going to get into that. And you do music for people's ceremonies, and I'm sure you have people coming up to you all the time saying that, you know, they had this impactful experience listening to your music. How do you go about the world being a normal guy, having bad days, and people coming up to you telling you how you impacted their life? How do you manage that?
Well, you know, most days no one's coming up to me, either because I'm not really going anywhere. Or I'm not that famous unless I'm at like at my own concert where there's people who have all come to see the thing, or like a certain festival where maybe it's very nichey, you know, and I'm more well known there. And I would say that in those situations, it is abnormal. It's not normal for people to give you a lot of compliments. Like a few of them is awesome, right? Like it feels really good. And especially when you're making music alone, more or less, it's very nice to go out there and kind of hear the response and then hear someone's personal story, because you're not getting that from like band members, and you don't have that repartee of you make something, you put it out, and then there's a response. I'm not even on social media that much, nor do I feel that that's anything close to the same as when you're looking someone in the eyes and they're telling you some story. But after like, I don't know, 15 minutes or 20 minutes of that, like your nervous system is just overloaded. You know, it's too much like energy coming at you, and you're also trying to be very present with people, and you're giving something back, but then you kind of get depleted, and it's not normal, because I think anytime, like Ram Dass is a great example. I mean, there's a lot of projection that happens with people, and they would look at Ram Dass and think and look at him as like a saint, or all these things. And I would see it around him in the limited time I had with him. And he was an amazing man, absolutely. But he's also a man. And sometimes we gloss over, like people meet me and they just assume that like I'm a vegan, I don't drink alcohol, all these assumptions. And I'm like, that's interesting. I mean, nothing wrong with any of those things, but why do you assume that, Or like, I think I burst the bubble a bit when they realized that I'm just like everybody else and kind of cranky and get nervous and get in a bad mood or I'm drinking a beer or something. But I think my humanity comes to the surface like anybody else. And my process of making music for me is my way of dealing with the challenges, the mental illness or mental health stuff or the stress, the anxiety. Creativity is infinite, and I need to dip into that well to feel better. And so I think that's why it resonates maybe with certain people, because it's a very human thing. Like, it's helping me. Well, it'll probably help you because we're the same. We're both just people trying to make sense of everything going on. And this is my little medicine I'm making for myself in the process. And I'm just very, very blessed to be able to share it. And it has any meaning for anyone else.
What is that process like for you?
What process? Like
the creative process? Is it? I'm assuming it's a daily practice.
It's a laborious process. It's one that you're constantly having to overcome the resistance not to do it. But I do it because I know that it's necessary to feel okay. But the good news is it can come in a lot of different flavors. It doesn't have to be, playing piano or recording a record. It could come from building something or cooking something really fun. Any kind of process that's creative. It's a muscle that we all have. It's a kind of energetic expression that is I believe the purpose of what it means to be alive. And so if you don't do it, it's a kind of stunted energy. And I've just noticed that for myself very much so. So I need to, a lot of times I'm rehearsing for something, for better or worse. I'm always rehearsing for something. And that feels like a burden. But I notice when I do it, I feel better, like for the day at least. It only lasts a day. You just keep diving into it.
It's one of those things, if you don't use it, you lose it. That's what they used to tell us when we were kids, right?
Yeah. I just keep doing it. So, but it's kind of self-serving because it helps me feel better.
You bring up that stunted energy if you're not creative. Have you had moments of writer's block, or because you're, constantly prepping for performance and stuff, does that keep you out of those blocks?
I don't know if writer's block is the right word. It's more like just frustration. Like, I'll just keep doing it. Like, inspiration shows up when I sit down to do it. It might not be something I'm happy with, but that's not really, I think, my job to even judge what comes through. It's like I'm just there to show up. And some days something really cool happens and some days it doesn't. And like the more professional mindset is like, well, yeah, that's how it goes. Like, it's like a wave. It comes up, comes down, goes left, goes right. I just need to keep showing up. And that's all I can really be responsible for. It's
very interesting. You say just show up. Richard and I's motto, obviously we didn't create this, but 80% of success is just showing up. And that's something that has got me through and got me to a lot of places in my life, is what you just said, is just showing up.
Yeah. And more than just showing up, like continuing to do so. It's the longevity. I would say more than 80%, well over 90% of my success is not stopping. Like, just continuing to work on these things over and over and over for a long time. Finishing things is a big part of it too. Getting the job done.
You've had the opportunity to collaborate with a bunch of different well-known people, be it other artists, Ram Dass, stand-up comedians like Duncan. What is that process like? Not that you want to, separate your babies, but was there one that was a more enjoyable or pleasurable experience?
I like collaborating just because it gets me into another way of working and thinking, and I get to like learn other people's processes and work with different types of sounds and just get into other worlds and lean on somebody else, right? It's like they kind of give you something in a way, whether it's their voice or a beat or whatever they do, and you get to just riff off of that. It's a sense of inspiration. So sometimes the hardest thing is getting started. And so if someone's already starting with something, it's easy to respond to something, or it's simple. And I love that. And I love having perspectives and sounds that I would just never, ever come up with on my own. Whether it's Ram Dass's words or DJ Anna making techno beats, or working with John Hopkins was a really beautiful experience for me, especially to like, you're sending something back and forth in a way to kind of hear how they're manipulating sounds in like their interpretation. You're like, man, I never would have thought about doing that with that piano thing or that vocal line. And I learn a lot from that. And so I really, really value any collaboration. And they're all just so different. Even the process itself. I think the one that was maybe one of the most enriching was working with Peter Broderick, because we got together in person in Ireland and we recorded a record for a week just in this house that had a little bit of equipment in Western Ireland. I had never been to Ireland. He and I had never met in person. We had no plan going there intentionally. And he's such a strong musician and improviser and so comfortable in that collaborative space that 12 songs just flowed out one after another in a very free, creative space. And I can't tell you how like, nourishing and fun that is. So the entire record, Burren, that resulted from that week, it was every song we improvised, and it's in the order on the record, in the order that we recorded them. So it's just like, that kind of stuff is magic. I don't know how that happens, but looking back on it, it just feels like a completely magical experience. And I live for that, I live for that. So I just love collaborating.
Do you have any dream collaborations or any collaborations that we have to look forward to?
Well, dreams. I mean, people who are dead. No. Yeah. I mean, sure. There's lots of artists I admire. Anything from Bjork to, Sigur Rós to. I mean, there's many more. I also love collaborating in ways that people wouldn't expect. Like, I don't think people expected the Duncan Trussell song. I like doing that. I like kind of like turning people's expectations around or playing with expectations in a way. And I also like a wide breadth of music. So I don't want to just be in one particular lane. And it's a great way to, especially if you're like producing for someone else. It's like, I don't even have to worry about like my own career as an artist. It's more like, I'm just trying to like help you and get really like put on this mindset of like what works for you. And that's really fun. I want to do more of that.
How different is that, wearing the different hats of creating and producing your own music versus working with someone and producing for them?
I think it's very different because with your own music, it's selfish in a way. You're just like, it always goes back to your sense of taste. And you're like, well, what do I like? Or what excites me? As opposed to, well, they've maybe there's a particular thing we're trying to do that they've said they want to do, right? Like a style or a theme or a vibe. And you're really trying to almost like be inside their head or inside their heart. And it's like being an actor in a way. It's like, when do you get to do that? Right? So it's getting to put yourself second. You bring your sense of taste into it, but it's like you have new clothing on and you're like, oh, what's it like to wear this? Oh, interesting. Well, I feel totally different. So let's play around in this space. So I think it can be playful and challenging because you're trying things maybe not your go-to natural avenues of expression.
So you said that you like collaborating because it brings something else out of you, and we know you do ceremonies, and we've all heard set and setting, and you've got to perform at a lot of different epic places, right? You got a retreat coming up in Costa Rica. You've done some stuff at Esalen. Do you have a favorite place to do ceremonies or a ceremony space that has brought something out of you?
Yeah, there's a farm that I've worked at since the beginning. I mean, where I did my very first ceremonies. It's in upstate New York, and that's where all the work began. I wouldn't be talking to you right now if it wasn't for that place. And I don't do them as often there as I used to, but we still do them. And I'm working on a documentary right now called Music for Mushrooms. We're in post production, and we filmed a ceremony there. And it was really special to be in the same room that a lot of this began. And I think that's still the roots of the tree. It feels like home court, and I feel pretty safe there musically to have listeners who are very patient in that space for sounds to really take their time to develop. Like the whole Music for Mushrooms album, which came out in 2019, was just two ceremonies at that farm, Friday and Saturday night. Um, and there's been a lot of really magical musical moments that just get birthed out of that space.
Is that because that was your original space? Is there something special about there? Is there a remembrance from maybe, pulling from the ether or something that goes on there?
I think I feel safe. It's a known. It feels like you're home. I used to live in New York. So when we were doing that, I was living in the city, and it just felt like my community. It was just my community and maybe some of their friends. It was like, and so in that way, it doesn't feel like I had to prove something, or I was really like performing. It was more like we were doing it together.
Those first ceremonies that you were just showing up with your music and your instruments and stuff to partake in the ceremony itself, and then it birthed into something more than that.
Yeah. So my first record is called The Education of the Individual Soul in 2008. And that record I made for myself to journey to, because I had been inspired by some like mushroom journeys I had and music. I was really just sort of reverse engineering it for myself. And I listened to that record when I finished it on mushrooms. And I had a very important and profound experience listening to it. And that was sort of enough for me. But I gave that record back when CDs and downloads were a thing. And I gave it to a bunch of people as a gift. And one of my friends, Lewis, a new friend at the time, he just got really into it, and he started organizing these circles. It was his farm. He bought it, actually. He was inspired in one of these ceremonies, like, I'm going to buy a farm, we're going to do ceremonies, and he did it. And he just kept bringing me up. It was all him. And I just kept showing up and just trying to learn as I went along, very much like what works, what isn't working. But it was all via an invitation by him.
Very cool. I've never had a mushroom experience. I've done a handful of ayahuasca ceremonies, so I assume as you're kind of like the maestro of the event, and the music or the Icaros is what sets the mood and the tone for that. So that's
the music
quite an important responsibility.
Yeah, it's the main thing guiding you through, and that was the intention behind the Music for Mushrooms album. Was it's 5 hours, so it's like I wanted to guide you from start to finish. You just press play, and if you've taken care of, you feel safe, and you're in a good place, and you can really, drop into the experience and just listen and breathe. That can be a very democratized way to guide people through.
I'm curious what your day looks like, or what your preparation looks like before you go into ceremony, before you go into a performance.
Not probably that different than how you'd prefer to go into a journey. Slowing down, spending some time beforehand, days or weeks, reducing certain things in your diet or your life. Just, quieting down and tuning your body to listen more. And the day of, same, just more of that. I think it's about clearing away the noise, and you're tuning your antenna so you can hear better.
And is that the sort of thing where, similar to the maestros, where they say that the Icaros come to them from the ayahuasca? Do you have a set list or an idea going in, or is it coming to you as everything is taking hold?
It's all improvised, and that's very important, because it's not a performance. It's also not something I thought up and planned. It's the opposite. I'm just playing in all the senses. Like I'm playing music, but I want it to be playful. I just want to just flow with the ideas that are coming, especially when it's from what's happening in the room. And in that way, you want to be the voice of the mushroom. But in many ways, that's no different than the creative process anytime. I want to be, where does creativity? What is the muse? I don't know where that comes from. All I know is I want it to grace me and flow through myself as an instrument. So all that preparation in a way is just tuning yourself as an instrument, your brain and your body, to be free and to be able to allow whatever wants to come through, and to try not to be too attached to the results, which of course is not that easy, but you kind of go in and out of attachment itself. But it's like surfing, Sometimes you're catching a wave and you're like, wow, we are surfing. This is enjoyable. And there's times where it's like I crashed and now I'm looking for the next wave, and that's how, and it's cool. Like we'll just keep going, just keep swimming. And then inevitably, this is multi-hour. So it's like inevitably some other wave comes and maybe it's surprising to you. And I've learned over the years, that's actually the challenge of it, is just surfing those waves of judgment and letting them go over and over again.
Do you have a sweet spot when you're in the pocket with the dosage, or does that vary per?
I don't take a lot. I just take a little bit to kind of get the spirit in me, because I don't need to take a lot. One, I'm very sensitive now to it, but also it's just about bringing that spirit in. I have a lot of knobs and dials going on. It's a pretty technical process when I'm playing. I mean, it's a very, rehearsing for me is just rehearsing that muscle of it, because you're not really thinking. I mean, you're thinking about it, but you're not like trying to figure it out while you're doing it. But there's a lot going on.
I've heard you say that psilocybin is your medicine of choice. That's what you do your ceremonies to. That's what you come up with your music to. What is it about psilocybin that does it for you? Have you tried experimenting with your music with other medicines, or psilocybin your medicine and that's your calling?
It's my original teacher and my closest ally, and in that way, I have great respect for it as a teacher, and will continue to do so. That being said, I've worked with ketamine a lot because my partner is a ketamine therapist, and I found some really wonderful alignments there musically. And then I hear from people, I have a little bit of experience with MDMA work and the music. I would never write music for ayahuasca. It's just not my culture or medicine, but yet nonetheless, I hear people who have used it in that space, or used it with LSD or DMT experiences and so forth. And it works for them. I think it's mostly because the music is very introspective, and it's often about, it's creating a kind of space that's good for your own introspection and your own inner work. And so a lot of those medicines in the ceremonial setting are opening you up to a space that's very conducive for inner work and revelation and insight. And so the same constituent parts musically work well, where it's the things I'm doing musically are not having a lot of lyrical content and so forth and so on, the long form songs.
So you said you would never write music for ayahuasca, but I believe your song Grandmother Spear, that was from an ayahuasca journey?
Well, it's about ayahuasca. Yeah.
All right.
It's not for ayahuasca.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my studio records, as I was saying at the beginning, like they're not written, they're not intended to be guiding ceremonies, but it doesn't mean you can't use them off label, and some people do, including the Ram Dass record. I didn't write that to guide a ceremony, but I've heard a lot of people who drop the song like I'm Loving Awareness in a ceremony, and it works for them really well. So Grandmother Sphere was notes, verbal notes I was taking to myself after my first journey with ayahuasca, and that was like 2008.
So my question off of that, one of the lyrics is you say, or one of the quotes you say is, "You didn't transcend your ego; you became teammates with that." Does that still resonate with you today?
Yeah, I don't think I'm in a battle to transcend my ego anymore, or certainly to like get rid of it. And I think that's a fool's errand anyway. So it's more that mindset of how can we be partners, because that's really what it is about. And that's a more loving attitude for myself. That I appreciate that attitude.
First time I heard that, it brought me to my knees. I was like, man, you you hit it there.
Well, that's the medicine. It wasn't me. You know, I mean, that's just literally things that were being told to me, and it was just really I was feeling them. You know, psychedelics allow you to have ideas like that, but you really feel them. You internalize what their meaning is. You get it on a feeling level, and so that's, you know, throughout that journey, I was just basically either in the present moment, breathing and experiencing complete enlightenment, or essentially forgetting and being lost on these reveries of thought. And then I would realize that and be like, wow, I've been on this whole journey for the last 5, 10, 15 minutes, usually involving a lot of suffering, and then just go back to the breath. And within like one breath, you're back into Satori, and over and over and over again. And so there was a lot of challenge in that, but at the same time, just incredible realization that it's no further away than our next breath. So in doing that, I saw how powerful my ego was. And I was seeing it like a friend in a way. I was like, well, you're a huge part of me and have been. You're very strong. You know, you do a lot of things for me and have. And I'm not trying to get rid of you. You know, I want to be teammates together. I want to work together because we both have the same sort of end goal. We're working with the identity of who it is to be me. And we want to do well in the world, but the ego is trying to protect me and look out for me. And I'm like, well, let me help you in a sense. You know, let's realize what strength there is when you can take a rest. You're there, but you're just like calm, and the presence can come to the fore. And it's like, wow, this is really powerful. And it's about the servant versus the master type thing.
It's amazing what beautiful conversations we can have with ourselves in those situations versus sometimes the conversations we might have with ourselves in traffic or in line at the grocery store, or, you know, maybe you do something boneheaded or whatever, and you have a very not pleasant conversation with yourself. You're not very nice to yourself, but when you're in those states where you can really have those kind of loving, caring, like you said, friend-like conversations.
Yeah. I have no comment there. I mean, yeah.
It's beautiful because I had a very similar experience in my second ayahuasca ceremony where it was just like all over the place for 10, 15 minutes at a time. And then I would catch myself and be like, remember to breathe. You got to breathe. And I would breathe and I would calm everything down and I would have a lot better introspection and everything. And then, oh, what's that over there? And then all of a sudden it would speed up and go haywire. It was like that for like 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah. Which is maybe just an amplification of our normal consciousness. It's just in our normal consciousness, it's not so extreme, but it's the same process. And so for some of us, like we're trying to amplify our own ability just to remember and be aware. And like the answer is always just presence or loving awareness or breathing or mindfulness, whatever you want to call it. And that's not like a hard, weird, complicated thing. It's just like literally maybe the breath is your gateway to that, like a normal breath. But it's just where you put your attention. As when you put it onto one thing like that, that's when the doorway opens.
Yeah.
So you mentioned love and awareness, and I'm sorry to have to ask you probably the question you get asked in every interview, but I am a Ram Dass guy. He brought me to the table with a lot of things, and you conducted his last interview, and you bring up love and awareness. Is it just as simple as just being here now and we're having a conversation, so being in the conversation? Is there any secrets to it, or is it just as simple as breathing and being here?
I would say it's your natural state. So it's actually more like peeling back an onion. It's the loss, when you take off judgment, when you take off before or after. It's what is just in that presence. Maybe you just like, with my experience with Ram Dass, at least, it was the presence with a flavor on top of it of just like active loving, kind of like just warmth towards me, not knowing me because he chose to in that moment. And it was a gift. That was like, I'm just giving you, like, not only am I giving you like I'm here, but it's not cold, it's actually quite warm. And that was the love part. So sort of awareness with love. It's like, and that, I think that is an active process. You are awareness, which is in a sense nothing, but not nothing in a bad way. Nothing being nothing. It's kind of perfect. Like everything stems from that. But there's this interesting ability that we get to make some choices here about, do you want to offer lovingness? And I, for one, have experienced this in psychedelic experiences sometimes, that I have this song on my last record called "You Can't Fall Out of Love," and that was this feeling and a ketamine experience of like, every time I found this boundary condition I thought might be like death, or I would cross through it and be held or continue to be caught by grace, the mother, God, love. And it's like that you can never be out of. You can't fall out of it in a way. And in that sense, loving awareness is all that is. And so that is the great mother. That everything comes from a mother in a way in this universe. Everything. From a circle. We actually literally come from a circle. Circles within circles within circles within circles. I mean, that is physical. And so as above, so below. The great circle we come from, whatever that source is, thank God, it's a kind of motherly love. And I just would experience that sensation, how you're always held in that way. And that is, I don't know how to describe it other than to say, like, we're real lucky that's the case, because the alternative would just be abject horror, like chaos for no reason other than just destruction. And that's actually not what I've sensed the engine of the universe to be. It's like 50.1% the other, so that it can keep churning, but the thing that's holding it all is love.
Thank you for sharing that and sharing your perspective. It's going to take another 10 years to wrap my head around that, but I appreciate you sharing
It's
that.
just words. That's why music is great, right? Because you encounter the similar feelings, but it's not an idea, right? It's just a feeling, and that's more than enough. Maybe that's everything, right? Is feeling. So that's why I think music can be so powerful.
Yeah, very powerful.
You've mentioned your partner a couple times, Rada, I believe it's pronounced, and I believe you guys work together. She works for you. How do you guys manage that relationship? Rich and I are brothers, obviously, and we go. Some days we love each other. Some days we want to mush each other in the face. How do you guys?
Sometimes we do mush each other in the face.
Well, I mean, hey, you guys live in different states, so that's an interesting technique. Maybe that helps.
Wait, we used to live together, but like, how do you manage the business part and the relationship part?
It's a dance. I mean, look, your relationships and probably your romantic partner, if you're lucky enough to have one, is absolutely the ground zero crucible of your spiritual work. And if you see it otherwise, you're missing the point. So it's very, very rich, and meaning it's a constant exercising of loving, and one person's a little out of balance and then the other person's a little balance. You're kind of supporting each other, and this is how all relationships are. So for better or worse, we've chosen to do work together, and then also our life together. And she has 2 kids, so there's that whole level to it. And I think it's a continual work in progress, but it's one that I learn a lot from. And sometimes it's challenging for me to figure out that work part. I used to do the opposite with my previous partner. It was like absolutely separated. And I don't think that served me very well, or maybe it did at that time. But for now, Rada's continued to have this invitation to continue to collaborate, and it's been good for me. We've done all my retreats together, like at Esalen or the ones we're doing in Utah. And so that's been cool. And then she's helped with a lot of the ceremony concerts. And then of course she supports me with her counsel and support all the time, as partners do. She's traveled a lot with me for a lot of events, which is helpful. So I mean, there's no easy answer. It's just say like it. I just recognize it's not like separated out. Like okay, this is work, this is relationship, this is spiritual work, this is like chores. It's all the same. It's all spiritual work, and that's not because it's all like heavy. It's just obvious to me. Like I don't. You get a free pass where it's like you're on the podcast and you're trying to be a certain way, and then I go treat myself like a piece of shit, and then I go in to cook dinner and I'm a different guy. It's like no. Like it's all the same thing. You're wearing different hats, different jobs, but what's the through line of the soul and authenticity about the education of the individual soul? And so hopefully, or I think at best, a relationship is one where you're both encouraging that growth by the nature of your energy together.
Amen.
That's happening, right? No matter what. But people blame people or like, well, it's their fault, all those stuff. It's like, but really, it's all just soul work. Everyone we meet, everything we do. It doesn't mean you're like, oh, well, this has a purpose. Therefore, it's like, no, sometimes you're angry. But it's that, as Ram Dass would say, there's that seat of the soul. There's that sense of awareness. So you don't lose that. So maybe you are angry. A lot of times at nighttime, I get really anxious or down. It's just like a different lens. And I know that. And I'll say to Rada, like, I'm feeling really whatever, anxious about this show. I think this thing's going to be really bad. It's like, but I know that I'll wake up and feel better about it. But nonetheless, I feel that right now. And so it's a difference between like being lost in it versus like you see that you're playing a role in a movie versus you're just lost in the movie. It's like I think keeping that sense of awareness is the golden egg.
I've been having that a lot lately where I see these feeling like anger, something that I'm always working with. And I see like today at sunset, I saw all the anger and it was just there. It was like clouds just coming through. And I'm like, well, I'm not really angry right now, but all these thoughts are kind of coming through. So I feel that when you say you're just kind of watching the movie or playing that role in the movie.
Yeah. Kristen Dass, I think the movie of me, I believe he calls it that. You're just watching it go by. You're like, oh, look at that. That's interesting. It's still happening. And that was sort of the partners, teammates idea. It's like, I'm not trying to change it as much. I'm just like, I'm not as attached to it. Ideally.
Yeah.
I was just curious about the upcoming retreats and stuff. I know Jimmy had mentioned there's one in Costa Rica. Do you have it? And you mentioned some in Utah. Do you have any others coming up in 2024?
Yeah. So in February, we'll be at the Reunion Retreat Center in Costa Rica, which is beautiful. Our first time doing a work there. It's going to be a ceremony retreat. So working with the Niños Santos. I've never done a public retreat like this. So this is a big deal where people, it's very thoughtful. You can apply. We'll call you, see if you're a good fit, talk to you about it. Very hands-on, just 35 people. That should be deep. And just like my Music for Mushrooms record, I'll be playing music live and going through those experiences together. But we also have been doing retreats at Esalen in Big Sur, California, about twice a year, usually around July 4th and then mid-December. So we're just about to go now. And we'll probably continue doing that as long as they have us back. And then we haven't been going back to Utah in a couple years. I don't know if we will, but we're looking at some other spots. I enjoy those deeper dives with folks. It's a lot of energy, but it's also really rich. And so best way, if you're into that kind of stuff, they tend to go fill up fairly quickly, is just get on our newsletter, go to eastforce.org and sign up.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So we have the final four. It's 4 questions we ask our guests at the end of every podcast. The first one I have for you is, are you a coffee drinker?
Yes.
How do you brew your coffee and how do you take it?
I make I'm black and just straight up. And I found I used to have. I mean, I got really into coffee over the pandemic. Yeah, I was from Portland, you know. So I was like, I'm gonna spend some money on like a coffee maker, and I bought this fancy Portland coffee maker Kickstarter thing. I had it for a while. I didn't like it. It actually didn't work very well. I returned it, and I ended up using. I use a percolator. Love it. Simple, straight up percolator. And then Rada, I make her coffee every morning. I wake up before her, and she gets an espresso. We have this fancy espresso machine which I don't even use. I just make espresso for her with oat milk, a little honey, a little spice in there, and froth it up. And I put it on this little heating device, so it's sitting there waiting for her when she wakes up.
That's amazing.
I make a killer oat milk latte, but it's for her.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
Are those secret spices, or can you share? There's a little bit of cinnamon, maybe some nutmeg.
Oh, geez, there's this spice blend we get at our co-op that's incredibly expensive. I need to buy another one. We're empty, and I think it has like black pepper and cardamom. It's sort of that like easterny spices.
Mhm.
You ever had like a yak coffee or like a Tibetan type coffee where they put the spices, a mountain coffee? You ever had they put butter in it?
I have with butter, yes.
Yeah, so it's sort of like that region. Well, it's like Indian in a way.
Okay.
But I found that I just take the spices with black coffee and it just makes it spicy. It's good.
You get a little bit of that, like the heat of the liquid and then the heat from the spices.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah,
that.
I like dumping in like sometimes just a bunch of cinnamon in coffee, black coffee, because it's a little sweet and it's good
Hmm.
for you. Black pepper's great for you. I mean, it's subtle, but I just think it brings out like the black coffee has a sharpness to it. And I like medium roast, like classic coffees, sort of like smooth. I'm always in search for the perfect smooth coffee. And so I don't know, I like it just seems very drinkable in that way.
Awesome.
I'm not a big Starbucks, like I can't even finish one of those tall ones with too much caffeine. Like I feel just wired.
Here's our Airey Bros pro tip for you. We interviewed a gentleman. His name's Charles Nick. He runs a company called Third Wave Water, and what that company does is he couldn't figure out why he could never brew a cup of coffee at home that tasted like his favorite coffee shop. And then he found out that they have a specific filtration system that produces a specific mineral profile.
Um,
He took that mineral profile, dehydrated the water, and now he sells that mineral profile. So you could put that in a gallon of
Mm.
distilled water, and then that's going to give you that specific mineral profile for the best, perfect cup of coffee.
Third wave water. Yeah, I'm looking at it. I mean, I use filtered water, but this is interesting. Classic light roast, medium roast, it's all these different kinds. Funny.
I don't use it all the time, but I will tell you, it will definitely taste like you're drinking from, your artisan coffee house.
We'll see. I'd love to try it.
Do you have a daily practice or rituals that you do on a regular basis to show up as the strongest version of yourself?
Well, what I just mentioned, and then engaging in some kind of creativity, kind of first thing in the day, aside from exercising, is most definitely the main thing. Yeah.
What kind of exercise do you prefer?
I usually just run outside and I do some weightlifting. There's like an outdoor gym. I used to be like a gym guy for many, many years, and then I got really bored with it. And then I was like, I think it's probably around the pandemic, and I was like, I'll just do like body weight exercises. And there's one of those outdoor gyms at the park. It's about a mile from me. So I don't run far. I just get my heart rate going, go down there. I was just there yesterday. It was 25 degrees in the morning. It was freezing. I have to bring like a little inflatable seat because the seats are iced. They're so cold. I can't even sit on them without the little seat. But yeah, I take the dog on a run And so it's not like super intense exercising. I'm more into like hiking and just kind of having a more active life as opposed to like hitting the gym in some weird way.
Being in Boise, you ever head out onto the river? You ever do any rafting?
Yeah, a little
Yeah.
bit. I'm not a big river rat guy, but you know, yes, we've done some. I love hot springs, so
Yeah.
there's some of those go hand in hand.
Nice.
What are you listening to right now? Music, podcasts, audiobooks? Are you reading anything?
Um, the last thing I read was a memoir. I have a podcast, and so sometimes I'm reading something for the podcast. It was Catherine McLean's memoir, which I enjoyed. And I do listen to podcasts, and I also music. It's funny, like I have like the vinyl world, which is like when we're cooking dinner, chilling. We have quite a big vinyl collection, so it's like we just listen to different things. And Rod has an amazing vinyl collection, and I have some. So that's all over the place. I have a lot of jazz stuff. She has a lot of modern stuff and all sorts of stuff. And then in Spotify type world, I have multiple streaming services, mostly because I'm just like curious, like what the algorithms do and stuff. So I use them for different purposes because I noticed like titles algorithm, what it will give me versus Spotify and so. And so, um, I'll usually scan my release radar because I follow a lot of artists, and I'll just see like I'll either listen to that or I'll just see and I'll listen to certain things. That's kind of more like feels a little bit like work. It's like what are people up to? But I actually really like the Discover Weekly mode because that's usually things I don't know, and I love being introduced to new music. Occasionally, I'll hear something and then take a deeper dive, like listen to that person's whole album, or same thing on the new releases. Something will come out, like for instance, Andre 3000's recent record. I mean, everybody was sending that to me. It's like, yeah, I've heard it. But I was like, all right, I'll check it out. Listen to that. And but podcasts definitely can take up a good amount of I'm a bit of a news. I like news. I like politics. I like spiritual stuff, and I like music technical stuff. So those are kind of the worlds I dance in when it comes to podcasts.
So you mentioned your podcast, 10 Laws. First things, where does that name come from? And second thing is, anyone listen to this podcast, give them like 2 or 3 of episodes of your podcast to go check out.
It comes from my song 10 Laws, which was the first song I wrote for East Forest, and it's a pretty popular song of mine in my catalog. So I was just riffing off that. And it's a strange name, I suppose. It sounds biblical, but it's not. It comes from the Hunter-Gatherer's Code of 10. But that's not what the podcast is about. The podcast is really sort of talking to people. It's mostly conversations. There are some meditations, sometimes some music. I have a Patreon too, where we do even more of that. But it's a lot of talking to people that I suppose it revolves around what works for them in life and living authentically and wellness. But that could be anything from science stuff, sometimes a lot of stuff in the psychedelic world because I'm in that world. So I'll be talking to a lot of researchers or other artists or people who are working in that space. I talk to musicians sometimes, and that's usually a little more about creative process. And then sometimes I do these series with my partner Rada, and that's a little more personal. We usually like talk about tours we just did because there's always like crazy stories. We just put out a podcast about our Japan tour, and people like those because we're very free, and it's kind of intimate, and it's like not very performative in that way. But it's been an amazing experience. I've been doing it for a while. I think I'm almost up to 300 episodes, and those are long form episodes. And I've just gotten the opportunity to meet some really amazing people I probably would not have met otherwise. Like even the Ram Dass album came from a podcast I did, or certain collaborations I've done came from the podcast. And I enjoy listening and being in that role of kind of bringing something out of someone else. And it's an evergreen podcast too. So you can just sit there and cruise back, and if anything looks interesting to you, listen to it, and should be just as relevant now, aside from the intro, as it was then. And I'm proud of that. It'll stand up for a long time as something people could dig into.
Very cool. I was digging into the episode with pretty recent with Daniel Pinchback that you did not too long ago. I was listening to that on my way home from work, so I find it.
Yeah, he was salty. I like that though.
I
A lot of
enjoyed
people,
it.
they put on like, airs in a way, right? And he's just like didn't give a fuck. He's just like, I'm angry today. I'm like, be angry. Like, it's kind of fun to listen to.
Yeah.
And it is. Like, we have this secret, like, ooh, someone's telling their truth. They're not hiding behind something. And if you listen to the Duncan podcast, like the whole hour, it's hilarious. And then there's some really good ones.
Yeah, a lot of what he was saying, Jimmy sent it to me. He's like, you're gonna like what he's saying. You've been saying some of these things for a minute now too, just kind of like the tech bros and some of that other sort of stuff that's kind of been I guess, for lack of a better term, corrupted a little bit.
Yeah. And I'm really want to be not in an echo chamber. So I want to speak to a diversity of voices within reason. I'm not there to platform people I think are just like, what the hell are you talking about? But I do want to be challenged, and I want to bring into the spiritual conversation a sharpening of the blade a bit, where it's not just about platitudes, but it's sometimes asking questions that I like to play. I hate this word, devil's advocate, but it's like I like to just put on that hat of like, well, what are some questions that might be coming up for people? So, what about this? I'm not being combative as much as just trying to also make it be a little more of an interesting show. And I think those are some of the best podcasts, or when there's a little bit of conflict, and that's not vindictive, but it's like you're hearing differing opinions, and that's a bit more interesting.
I thought you did a really good job, because I don't necessarily think you might have agreed with him on everything, but you did, like you said, you didn't combat him and you let him speak his truth. And it was a very interesting, entertaining conversation to listen to.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, I'm trying to not interrupt people too much. It's gonna be a little tough on like remotely, but it's giving people time to say their thing. And I don't look at the podcast like, oh, I need to have equal time, or it's about my opinion. It's more like I'm there less. I'm trying to give them space to kind of showcase what they have to bring to the table. It's not something you do in life. Maybe you should, but like that's why I think the podcast is fun in a way, because like you listen in a different way. I learned things from people I already knew that I'm like, oh, I never would have learned these things about you if we weren't in this format, because I'm sort of asking questions and riffing off what you're saying. And that's not, I know we like to say, oh, podcasts are like normal conversations. They have elements of that, but it is sort of its own medium if you use it in certain ways, can bring out a uniqueness that isn't in life. That's kind of cool.
And I think it's important too for people to see or hear that people can have a healthy conversation that doesn't get adversarial. They can have differences of opinions and they can still have a gentleman adult conversation.
You don't have to agree on everything.
Right.
Like you can have disagreements and be like, so be it.
Right.
That's the whole echo chamber thing. Is like I don't love hearing conversations where people are just sort of convincing each other the same thing. That's actually, this is a whole nother area, but part of the problem of a lot of the dialogue and conversation on social media and the internet is that you will listen to those conversations, be convinced of something, but there's been no dissent. There's no other ideas coming into the conversation, so you don't even know. You're just like, well, I've learned. I now know about this thing because these 2 people or 3 people were talking, and they've convinced me. And it's like, it takes a lot of work to seek out discerning and divergent opinions, and then do your own home. Because anything you read now online or see, of course, it has an agenda, but some of it's not even real. and or at least for the next months, years, not very long, when you're listening to a podcast, right now at least, it's actually a person talking. So it's like, well, at least it's a human being sharing their opinion, and you can take that as a data piece. So now go get other ones. And, if there's something going on in the world politically, which there is right now, which I'm not even going to bring it up because it's so hot, but it's like, I actually like hearing lots of different opinions on it in depth. And smart people, not just like people speaking off the cuff emotionally. It's like, that's not very relevant. And that's a great way to learn and really be like, I think I understand more about this issue because I'm hearing people share their perspective, not in a soundbite,
And there are definitely some emotional people out there right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, it's interesting. And maybe that's why podcasts are somewhat popular. It's sort of like a kryptonite in a way to the short form. It's interesting. It has something to do with audio and listening, I think, too, and your imagination and being with people. It's like the radio in a way. But anyway, it's a pretty cool medium. I had a podcast back in 2010, and I released like 64 episodes. It was just music, and I ended up taking the whole thing down because I was like, oh, I'm not very proud of this music, but I remember getting into the medium a long time ago, and it was cool. I never thought it would grow as big as it did, but I think it's cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. Very cool. Last one we have for you. Do you have a guilty pleasure or guilty pleasures?
Oh, sure. I like to ask people that question musically. I'm like, what's your guilty pleasure music you listen to? Like cool musicians. Another way you could look at that is like vices, there's many. But this maybe sounds like an easy one, but alcohol. It wasn't really a thing for me so much. And then through the pandemic, I think like a lot of us, I was like, well, I'll just have another beer. It's whatever. Yeah, 2 years go by, and next thing you know, like, I'm having a beer every day or two every day. And my life was moving fine. It wasn't like anything was falling apart. So it wasn't that thing or like turning into a pack of beer. But it's like, I don't think this is that good. And I've still kind of haven't found the right rhythm with that I'm happy with. And it's part of it's like judgment of myself and not wanting to just be in some kind of shame spiral, but also wanting to be healthier just because I'm not getting younger. And so I guess that's a vice. I like a good beer.
What's your preferred?
It's like my coffee. Like I like a really good Pilsner or like
Okay.
The lighter sides, but I like flavor. Like a spicy light beer. That's a Pilsner to me. I'm not as in, I love, when I was in Ireland, I loved Guinness. I thought it was amazing when it's on tap there. But I'm not some big snob about it. When I was in Japan, their Budweiser is the Asahi, or I don't know how you pronounce it. You've seen it, I'm sure, in certain import shops. It's like Sapporo, but it's very dry and very drinkable and just delicious. For some reason, like way better over there than when I would buy it here. Since then, I'm like, it's just not the same. It was wonderful. I love those. I love those beers. But food, and our sexual energy are probably our two main ways to mess with our consciousness and our spirituality. And so I'm definitely aware of it. Including, I look at alcohol and food, all of it, it's like sort of the same thing. It's just ways you're messing with your chemical balance, coffee, and we're just doing it all day long. I see it. I definitely see it. And I like being healthy, so I like feeling healthy.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, pandemic had the same impact on us. We actually branched off from this project and had a side project for 2 years that was completely devoted to craft beer with our cousins. It started as a Zoom call one Saturday when everything first popped off, and we were like, we should start recording these. And then 200 or 100 episodes later, it was the same thing. It's like, I think I'm doing this too much, because it got to the point where it's like, oh, it was just Saturday when we're meeting. And then it's like, oh, I'm going to be editing. So let me have a beer while I'm editing the beer podcast. And then at one point I was working at a brewery. I was like, this has got it's out of control.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I'm sure we're definitely not unique. I mean, everybody. And a lot of my friends, now we're going through this wave where a lot of people are stopping drinking. So the pandemic was nuts. So
Yeah.
I only drank for a month of my life, and it was the third fist fight me and Rich ever had. So that was the end of my drinking days. I tasted all the beers they were talking about in that month, but I'm good on alcohol.
Good for you. I'm impressed.
Thank you so much for your time tonight, sir. I really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you for the music you put out there. It's got me through a lot of tight spots the past couple of years, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for sharing it. Appreciate it, guys.
Yeah. Have a great night. Thank you for your time. Appreciate you.
All right. Peace, guys. Have a
Be
good
well.
one.
Take care.